In this video, we're going to work through number 1 and 2 on page 2 in your additional proofs packet. So in number 1, we are given that ray BF bisects angle AFC and angle CFD is congruent to angle BFC. Our job is to prove that angle AFB is congruent to angle CFD. There's a lot of letters in here, a lot of angles. So sometimes what I do to help keep things straight is I can visualize it better if I think of these in colors instead of trying to keep track of all the letters. So I started to do this. I'm going to go ahead and highlight some of my angles. So I'm going to let angle AFC be orange, angle CFD be yellow, angle BFC be green, and angle AFB, I'll let that be, I've got a turquoise here. Okay. Now I notice I have another CFD, so I'm going to highlight this yellow. Okay. So remember, proofs are kind of like a puzzle. We're trying to figure out how do we go from what's given to conclude what we're trying to prove. And so we're trying to use properties and postulates and definitions to work our way from what's given to what we're trying to prove. So I've got part of my two-way table filled in. One thing I know, I'm just going to fill this in right away. I know what I'm trying to prove is always going to be at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and put angle AFB is congruent to angle CFD. I'm trying to prove that. I'm going to go ahead and keep my colors going. Oh my goodness, I just meant I meant to put that one in turquoise. Oh dear. This is going to mess it up, isn't it? It's going to make it look green. That's turquoise. Sorry. That's what I meant to do. So we're trying to work our way to show that angle AFB here. I'll highlight this in turquoise if I can pick the right color. I'm trying to show that that's congruent to angle CFD. That's this one. So right now, we haven't proven that they're congruent. Okay, so make sure you don't put that they're congruent in your picture yet, because that's what we're trying to prove. All right, let's go ahead and we start with our given. So they tell us that ray BF bisects angle AFC. Here's angle AFC. So I'm going to put that as my first statement. And I just rewrite it. And that was given to me. Notice I also have in my proof the other given statement. Angle CFD is congruent to angle BFC. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and use my colors. This is supposed to be turquoise. All right, so in my picture, I'm going to go ahead and find angle BFC. That's this one right here. They tell me that these two angles are congruent. They gave that to me. So I'm going to go in my picture, and to show angles are congruent, I can give them the same number of arcs. All right, so if I each give these one arc, they're showing that they're congruent. So my job is to try to figure out how can I use these angles and my given statement to help show that my turquoise and my yellow angle are congruent. So we haven't really done anything with our first statement yet. It tells us that ray BF bisects angle AFC. Well, what does that mean? Remember, when a ray bisects an angle, it cuts it into equal pieces. And so if AFC is being bisected here, that tells us that my turquoise angle and my green angle, they have to be congruent to each other. So I also know that angle AFB has to be congruent to angle BFC. So I'm going to put that in my picture, or not my picture, my proof. Angle AFB has to be congruent to angle BFC. And I know that because they told me that ray BF bisects angle AFC. And so if we're thinking what property allows us to go from something bisecting to saying that the pieces are congruent, that's our equal parts. So that would be the definition of an angle bisector. An angle bisector cuts your angle into two equal parts. That's what we stated here. So definition of angle bisector allowed us to say that these two angles were congruent. All right, so we're almost there. We have to figure out how are we going to use these statements up above to conclude that angle AFB is congruent to angle CFD. So if I look, and sometimes this is why I use colors, it kind of helps me, I can see that angle BFC is congruent to both angle AFB and angle CFD. Well, that must mean that angle AFB is also congruent to angle CFD. Right? So I'm using statements 2 and 3 to conclude that my turquoise angle also has to be congruent to my yellow angle, which I see in my picture. They all have one arc. So the question is, what property did we use? Remember when we take two statements up above to conclude that these two angles are congruent, we're using the transitive property. Right? If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. You can also think of this as substitution as well. You can imagine you're taking AFB and you're substituting it in for angle BFC to conclude that angle AFB and angle CFD are congruent. So transitive or substitution would be acceptable.